Some of my favorite parts of archaeology in general are those relationships. It's the relationships with locals, it's the relationships with your team, it's even the relationship with those closest to you that is helping make your kind of archaeological dreams come true, as cheesy as that might sound.
Life Reimagined with Stacey Ray.
Before we hear from Dr. Smiti, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and follow us so you never miss an episode of Life Reimagined. Hi, I'm joined by Dr. Smiti Nathan, an archaeologist, educator, and storyteller who's redefining how we connect with history. With a PhD in anthropological archaeology, did you like that mouthful? Smiti took a bold step beyond academia to launch Anthico, a creative consultancy that blends research with storytelling. Through her popular YouTube channel and digital content, she brings the past to life, from ancient knitting to the surprising story of jackfruit. I'm so excited to dive into how she's reimagined her career and made history more accessible and way more fun for everyone. Hi, Smitty. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, Stacey.
Hi, Smitty. It's so nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for doing this. I know you've got some exciting things happening soon, right?
Yes.
Uh, is this your first baby?
No, this is my second. My
Oh.
first baby's downstairs. He's actually homesick today. Well, he's
Aw.
fine now. He's fine now. He's
Oh,
fine now.
yeah.
It's one of those days.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you very much.
Oh, no worries.
So I'm fascinated by archaeology. I don't know as much about it, as I probably should. But what made you decide that archaeology was where you wanted to head with your career?
So it honestly was a random career test that I took in high school. And, it popped up a bunch of different things, and you always take them with a grain of salt. But one thing that popped up was anthropologist. And as a junior, I had never heard that term before.
Oh.
And so then I started looking into it. And in the US, the way anthropology works is that there's usually four major subdisciplines, and one of them is archaeology. And I had never thought of that before because, when we often think of archaeology, we think of Indiana Jones or,
Right.
something like that. And
Yeah.
while those are definitely entertaining movies, it just never seemed like a career path for me. But then when I started looking into it, it was ticking a lot of boxes for me. I love to read. I
Mhm.
love the social sciences. I love puzzles, and archaeology is like this big puzzle where you don't fully have the answer, but you can
Right.
always tell a story. And then, young me, I wanted to travel, and this was like a profession where you could travel, and someone in theory would pay you to do it. Very little, but in
Right.
theory, they
Right.
would pay you. So I started looking at colleges, and I found, a couple that had archaeology as a major. I did not realize it at that time, but there's very few colleges that actually have an explicit archaeology major.
Oh, I
It's
didn't know
usually,
that.
yeah, so you usually have to major in anthropology with a
Right.
concentration in archaeology, or you would do a specific type of archaeology, like classical archaeology, which is Greek and Romans.
Right.
And so I just didn't have that knowledge, and I didn't know any archaeologists growing up.
You're
So
right.
I was like, okay, what schools have it listed as a major? And it worked out. And then, I tried it out in college and I enjoyed it. And I just have done it since I was 18.
It's interesting because I, too, in my former life was a social scientist. I still like to think of myself as one. More sociology, obviously,
Gotcha.
but anthropology was always part of my interest. I just didn't realize archaeology was actually part of that. So when you're talking about the different types of archaeology, I know there's forensic
Mhm.
anthropology. Is there forensic archaeology?
Yes, you could say that. I think so. The lines sometimes between archaeology and anthropology, especially when you're thinking of it as subdisciplines, can be a
Right.
bit blurred. So,
Yeah.
for example, I have friends who are trained in what's called bioarchaeology. So they
Okay.
study human remains, they learn a bit about forensics, but they might consider themselves more of a biomedical anthropologist as opposed
Oh,
to a
okay.
bioarchaeologist. And that just really depends what kind of frameworks they're working with. So I had to take forensic anthropology, for example, when I was an undergrad, one of my favorite courses, in all honesty.
Can I tell
Yeah,
you,
please.
it was one of the most boring classes I ever took because I am conceptual. I don't
Mm,
want to sit there detail by detail by detail by detail. And despite my passion for true crime, which I'm
yeah.
an addict, but I love hearing the stories or reading the books, but I wouldn't want to be a criminologist or
Mm.
a profiler, those things, they just too in the details for me. So, what was it about it that made it your favorite?
It honestly was the setting and the professor. So
Yeah.
fortunately, I got to go to George Washington University for
Oh,
my undergrad.
yeah.
And so our forensic anthropology class, which you often take with human osteology, so that's the study of human bones, it
Right.
was at the Smithsonian.
Oh,
So yeah, I know.
okay. That's a lot different than sitting in a lecture hall
Yeah,
and
we
talking about that. Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the way it worked was the human osteology component was very hands-on,
Right.
and we were, working with collections. It was a 3-hour class, but it flew by because we were studying the bones, we were learning from one of the best in the field, and we could go to the Smithsonian after hours, which was pretty
Wow.
cool as an undergrad. And then
Yeah.
the forensic anthropology component, if I'm remembering it correctly, was more of a 1 credit component, and that was the lecture. But that was also fascinating too because our
Right.
instructor brought in really cool guest lecturers from the
Mm,
FBI, different forensic units. So we were getting those stories as well as how they were approaching forensics as well from people who were working on it day to day. So
right.
that's why I say it was one
Yeah.
of my favorite courses. It was
Yeah.
very applied. I've had really fascinating sounding courses, but then when
Yeah.
you actually took them, it was just really
Like,
boring.
oh,
So
foo-hoo.
we've had
Yeah.
flip side too.
Yeah. I
So
remember taking of course, I'm probably old enough to be at least your mother, maybe grandmother, but I remember taking geology. Oh my God. I despised it then, but now I'm like so fascinated by rocks and nature and things like that. I should be taking geology now because it's like fascinating to me. But
yeah.
so how did you decide where you wanted to focus on in archaeology since you had so many different options?
Right.
Yeah,
So, you know, I was fortunate going through the US system for undergraduate. It's a liberal arts system. And
right,
that means you get exposure to a lot of things.
right.
And I actually have a couple specialties when it comes to archaeology. And that's just honestly built on experiences I've had. So, for example, in my senior year in my other undergraduate, I took a course on geographic information systems, and that's basically mapping. So if you think of, when you go to Google Maps and how all those satellites are working to make sure you can get from point A to point B, that's a bit of GIS.
Oh,
So yeah, and so I was like, this is so cool. I've never heard of this
yeah,
before, or I didn't hear about it until I think my junior year, but I was already abroad. So when I came back, I was just like, oh man, I wish I had more time
right.
to explore this field. So that's what I ended up doing my master's in is
Oh,
geographic.
okay.
Yeah, so I do, but it's combined with archaeology. So it's
Right.
it's a long name. It's geographic information systems and spatial analysis and
Yeah.
archaeology. I think they've since changed the name.
You need an acronym for that. Yeah.
Yeah, but while I was doing my master's, I discovered archaeobotany, and that is the study of ancient plant remains.
Right.
And then I got interested in that too. So when it came to my doctoral dissertation, I actually decided to use both methods and an additional method, of course, because why not?
Why not?
So yeah, so when it comes to the methods that I use in archaeology, they're very much driven by my curiosity and what I'm finding interesting, but also what we're finding in the field. Because sometimes you just don't know what you're going to find, and then you
Right.
find it, and then you have to be a good steward and you have to figure out how to take care of it and analyze it. And usually that means bringing in people who are specialized in it, but it also means learning a bit about it yourself. And a clear example of that for us is in Oman, which is one of the places I work. We found this ancient material called chlorite, which was a pretty big deal back in the day. It was a material used to make bowls and other vessels, and it was highly prized. Now, before we had found a site with all this material on it, I didn't know much about it. But
Right.
then we found a site with a bunch of that material. So then I had to learn a lot about it just to be a good steward and,
Right.
adapt to what we're finding. So that's kind of how the methods that I choose to use evolve a bit. I mean, of course, there are certain things that are like, this is not for me, but I'm going to be, a good archaeologist and learn about it. It's not my favorite. But then there's other things that you kind of learn as you go too.
So I think that because of all the movies and, as you say, Indiana Jones, or, even the show Bones, I remember my
Mm,
husband loved that show. He was obsessed with all the NCIS and all those
gotcha.
things. But I think my question is to you, do we get an accurate depiction of an archaeologist always going on digs? Is is
Hmm.
is that really accurate, or is there so much more to there are plenty of archaeologists who aren't going on digs,
I
right?
mean, that's absolutely correct. There are
Yeah,
archaeologists who go do digging. I go do digging from time to time,
right,
but a large part of my experience is not digging. It's
right,
not excavating. And so I will dispel some of the misconceptions in one way. So, the
right.
field method. So, yes, a lot of times people associate excavation with archaeology. And that
Yes.
is absolutely true. We definitely do excavate, but it's not the only method we use.
Okay.
We'd use other methods. So, for example, my favorite is actually what's called survey. And if you like hiking, that's probably the method for you. And
Right,
basically, what we do is we walk around different terrains and landscapes and we look for clues on the surface without even digging to see if we can find indications of an archaeological site. And those things might be, oh, we see a concentration of artifacts that could be old. We see some architecture that looks like ruins, and we have, scientific methods in which we record that. So that's a field method, of course, but there's also laboratory methods that people specialize in that are super important. So, for example, when we have materials that we want to have dated, like to figure out how old they are, there's two different types of dating: absolute dating and relative dating. And, those involve specialists as well,
right.
especially for absolute dating. The most common is radiocarbon dating.
Yeah,
So there are people who do that. And there's all sorts of different specialties, including with bones, where people might not be in the field as much, or they might spend just as much of time out of the field analyzing things as they are in the field. So, yeah, there's a lot of analysis that goes on at home. But I will say, some people really enjoy field work. I do, but it's hard sometimes for various reasons. You can't go into the field as much as you would like. But I also know archaeologists who don't love going to the field either,
right,
which I
right.
completely understand. It's
Yeah.
usually not luxury conditions we're in, but it's definitely an
Yeah, yeah,
experience.
yeah,
So yeah, so when it comes to kind of the field methods and how we work, it's not just excavation. It's just an experience that's not always typical, so I can
right.
understand why there's a curiosity about
Yeah,
it, and
yeah.
it I'm not gonna take that away from it.
Sure.
It's an experience that's hard to compare. So,
Right,
yeah.
right. So I understand that you did research in Oman and Ethiopia.
Yes.
Now, I do want to talk to you about Ethiopia, but I'm actually going for the first time to Oman
Oh,
in October. Very excited
wonderful.
about it. We are taking a group of women. We're doing the Emirates,
Okay.
and our goal is for meaningful cultural exchange with
Mm.
other women and sharing of, experiences and things like that. So, how did you end up going to Oman as a place of research?
So I will say, I think since my master's degree, I was really interested in the Indian Ocean region.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I had studied abroad in Greece. I had done fieldwork in Hungary and Romania, and I
Right.
really enjoyed my time in those places. But when it came to intellectual curiosity, the questions that were
Yeah.
really fascinating to me, I kept coming back to this Indian Ocean region. And I had done a bit of work in India. But then when I got to my doctoral degree, I wanted to try it a new place. So when I saw some of the work being done in Ethiopia, I was quite drawn there. And I did a field season with my PI, so my principal investigator, who I still collaborate with,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Michael Harrower, and we worked in Ethiopia together. But he also had a project in Oman. And the following year, he needed some help with executing his survey. So, one of the methods we talked about. And so I said, okay, yeah, I'll come. And I didn't expect to, I thought it was going to be a one off. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And then I got there and I really enjoyed the work for various reasons. I still kept working in Ethiopia, but I eventually decided to do my dissertation in Oman. So it was a bit of serendipity in terms of how I got to Oman.
Is Oman more modernized for women than, say, Dubai? Or is it
Okay, so that is tricky. Like, so it depends where you are. So for women in general, as a woman, I've never had a problem in Oman. Like,
right,
never.
right,
You're treated really well. And of
right,
course, if you look like a foreign woman, like the cultural expectations are different.
right.
But even when I go there, I still try to, be fully covered and everything like that.
Absolutely.
And also, it's just a good way to beat the heat because the heat,
Yeah,
like the sun, is very exposed
yeah.
there. And I've been to Dubai a few times. It's just such a different
Different
experience. Like Dubai
experience. Yeah, yeah. Dubai's like
is
a playground to me. Like,
Yeah, I
it's
mean, for
like
me,
a,
it's very city, like very, and I lived in cities and I live in a city now, but it's very, like you go to malls, it's not very walkable. So I will say, at least with my experience in Oman, it's a little bit easier to get to the heart of maybe meeting local people, like
yes,
the culture, than
yeah,
in Dubai. But I do have friends who work in the UAE who probably have a different experience. But
yeah.
as a woman, like I feel super safe there. It's to the point where sometimes I forget to lock my car all the time there. But
Yeah,
I'm usually
yeah,
working in the middle of nowhere. And if I'm ever walking alone by myself, like if I'm walking from one place to another, multiple cars will stop and ask me, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Especially if you're
oh,
not in the city. So
right.
um, people are very hospitable, very caring, I think.
Yeah, we're doing Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Oman. So we have days in each place
Gotcha.
because I think all three are just so different.
Yes.
Like I think that we do a disservice when we just go, we assume that everyone in the UAE is the same. And that is so
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
true. The
So
cultures
not
are
true.
not the same. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I like we want to meet a chef or a
Mm-hmm.
female entrepreneur, things like that. We want to learn about what their life is like and not for judgment person for
Yeah.
reasons of being judgmental. It's because I think they're just as fascinated by how we live as we are by how they live because it's just different. But I've
Yeah.
learned, and I am sure that you've learned this too. I say it every week when I'm talking to people, is travel gives you the ability not just to learn who other people are, but who you are at your
Yeah.
core, right?
Absolutely.
And you learn whether or not you're going to be a kind person
Mm,
or not.
yeah.
So, when you talk about survey, can you explain what that actually is?
Sure. So basically, the simple definition is that we walk around and look for archaeological sites.
Okay.
Now, there's different ways to do that. You can do that kind of serendipitously. You can just,
Right.
oh, okay, let's just wander around and see
Right.
what we find. And that does happen. But then there's also a method where you could be a bit more systematic.
Okay.
So you can be a bit more scientific in the sense of like charting out kind of the paths you'll walk and the
Okay.
area you'll cover. So you can do more statistical analyses later on.
Right.
So that's what we were doing a bit
Okay.
more. We were setting out to do a bit more of a systematic scientific survey, but there was plenty of serendipity in there too.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I imagine.
yeah, so that was recorded as well. So that's what I was brought in for, to help execute that.
So you're doing this
Mhm.
and you presumably identify something.
Mhm.
What's the next step after you do that?
So a typical day in the field for survey, then I can walk you through that. We wake up early because it's hot in Oman.
Yes,
Like,
gotta
no matter.
get it
Yes.
done early. Yeah.
And we take certain, instruments with us. We load up the car. We have usually certain set paths that we want to walk. And
Right.
there's usually 6 of us who are walking in a somewhat straight line, spread apart by like 10 meters.
Right.
And then we just walk, usually for a kilometer, and we're looking on the ground to see if we can find, architectural remains, concentrations of artifacts, usually ceramics or stone tools. And then
Oh,
if someone finds something, we'll alert them on our walkie-talkie and say,
yeah.
"Hey, I think we found something." Then we all go look, and then we see what might be there. And if it's like a one-off object, we might leave it. Unless it's really special, then we'll collect it and we'll take the coordinates. But then if there's something a bit more, we'll record that. And the way we do that is we have, you know, going back to like GPS, we'll
Yeah,
record
yeah,
the
yeah.
locations, we'll take photographs, and we'll, collect some of the artifacts so we can analyze them when we get back.
Right.
So at the end of the day or at the end of the season, we have, all this data in terms of where sites could be located, what types of artifacts were found, and then we start doing further analysis on that. If we find something more substantial, and it warrants further study, and we've got all we could from that information from looking at it, then we'll decide, hey, maybe we should excavate a bit of this site to see what's going on. So for us, we can get a lot of information from surveying, and we only excavate when we feel like we can't find out any more information and we want to get more information. That's at least the ethos of our team.
I think that's fabulous because you don't want to disrupt ecosystems and people's way of life for research.
Absolutely.
Right. Do you need permission from various governmental agencies and all kinds of things, even to do the survey?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you usually need at least one permit, but in some
Yeah.
countries it could be even more.
Ah.
I recently interviewed a friend, and she is running a project in Tanzania, and because they're using drones, she needs like at least 3
Oh.
permits.
Oh, yeah.
So for
Yeah.
us in Oman, we usually need 1 permit, and we have to apply for that at least 6 to 9 months in advance. And it basically is stating that, like, hey, we're allowed to do archaeological research. But in applying for the permit, we have to be very specific about what we're proposing to do. So it's not like you automatically get the permit, you have to apply
Right.
for it. And
Right.
so they're looking at various things like, okay, what are the credentials of the researchers? Do they have the money to support the archaeological project that they're executing? So, for example, survey is usually much cheaper to do than excavation.
Right.
So, if you don't have the funds to do a season safely, like, your permit could get denied. And then it's like, where are you working? And have you, like, what's your plan? And in a lot of countries that I've worked in, we usually have a representative from the government that's kind of tasked to be on the project with us.
Ah, okay.
And so it's one way to build partnerships, but it's also a training kind of program for people who might be working in various ministries or governments and
Right.
looking to get more experience.
So, where does the money come from to fund all the research?
So, if you're coming from an academic institution, you're usually relying on grant funding.
Right.
So, that could be grants that you apply for through your local government, through your university, or
Right.
through some other entity. And some local governments, so for example, there was a time where Oman used to give research teams certain types of funds. So, for example, I remember, I think it was 10 years ago at least, that we were able to get gas cards from the Omani government
Oh,
to like get fuel for our
right.
cars. But other times it's like in Ethiopia, you have to pay a percentage of your grant money to the government, and that's essentially overhead. And that's not a very uncommon thing. For example, anytime you get an academic grant, you have to pay overhead to the institution.
Right.
So it's a bit like that. So it just depends where you are. So,
Ah, okay. So, what find did you make in Oman, if any, that was Eureka? Huh.
well, the thing with finds and discoveries, you kind of have to know what you're looking at to
Right.
know that it's something. So,
Right.
for example, if you stumble across or just come across, some ruins, you can be like, oh, okay, this looks pretty, oh, that's pretty cool. But if you find a singular artifact, unless you're a specialist in that artifact, it's
Right.
usually hard to tell on the spot that it's something huge.
Right.
Sometimes you have indicators. I remember in Ethiopia, we found this carnelian ring with gold. And we were like, okay, we don't know exactly what it is. I had a hunch it was carnelian, which is an ancient type of gemstone. It's not as popular these days.
Okay.
It's if you think of a red gemstone like a garnet or a ruby, it has that color.
Okay.
But of course, this was corroded. It was
Right.
blocked in dirt. But we were like, this is not something we've seen before. This looks interesting. And only until we got it to the conservators, until we got it cleaned up, until we analyzed what was on it, did we understand like how big of a find that was.
Oh, why was this a big find?
Well, it for us, it indicated that this area in Ethiopia was having long distance connections with other parts of their ancient world. So the emblem on it was kind of this bull like creature, which we see, of course, in the Mediterranean, but also across Asia as well. And you don't find local sources of carnelian in Ethiopia. So the stone was definitely sourced from elsewhere too. So it was not just the raw materials, but also like what the design could represent that made it really interesting. But you
Ah,
don't know that upon first glance. Like,
right.
especially if you have to like clean the artifact and everything. But there are some finds that you look at and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is pretty cool that it's here. An example of that is in Oman when we were doing survey. One of the people on our team, they found, a certain type of stone tool. When we found that, we were like, oh, this is pretty sizable. And we think it's this type of stone tool, which is pretty cool that it's here. So that's why it's also just helpful to work on a team because you're just, pooling all your knowledge together to make
Right.
sense of what you're finding.
Are your
So
teams multidisciplinary?
usually our teams are, and usually our teams are fairly small, at least on the projects I work on. So because we're doing mainly survey, I've often worked with teams that are 10 people and under, at least for the projects that I continue to be a part of. But I've also worked on projects where, there's been like 30 to 50 plus people
Oh my,
involved.
that is a
Yeah.
that sounds like a lot to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's usually when you're excavating a larger site. So
Right.
you have, teams working in different areas, and then you might have teams doing other specialties, for analyses, so it just can get quite big. But the projects that I tend to work on long term are usually smaller projects.
So, because archaeology is clearly looking at history and the
Mhm.
past, do you have much opportunity to interact in a meaningful way with today, the present, with
Yes.
regard to culture and the people that live there and
Oh, absolutely. Well, when I was in my undergraduate, I was really debating between studying cultural anthropology, where you do
right?
a lot more interacting with people in the modern
Yes.
present, and archaeology. And I found for myself personally that I really enjoyed the interactions I had with locals and peoples while doing
Right.
archaeology. So that was just a personal preference.
Yeah.
And our field work, especially the way that we approach it, is so dependent on local community interaction and
Mhm.
engagement and collaboration.
Right.
It's very important for us, and especially teams I'm affiliated with going forward, that, we not just confer and consult with local community members, but bring them into the project fold as well.
There's so much more ahead right after the short break.
Did you miss these trips? Music in the air, sunset over Florence, a warm breeze in Havana Vieja. This wasn't just travel, this was sisterhood in motion. These are the memories that live in your suitcase long after you're home. These women became friends. These moments became milestones. We don't just go, we go together. Don't miss the next one. Visit sisterhoodtravels.com/our tours to book your next trip. Let's go make memories.
Picking right up where we left off. When you were talking about your ethos of your team earlier, it was reminding me that in my company, because we travel all over the globe, I firmly believe that we should be leaving more than we take anywhere
Mm,
that we go. And I don't mean necessarily money.
yeah.
I mean respect and understanding and compassion and, things like that. And especially respect,
Mm,
not only for culture and traditions, but the land, right?
yes.
So I think it's interesting as what starts as survival changes over time into a well-preserved culture or technique. It's like I look at a lot of indigenous communities
Mm,
in different places that, they're trying so hard to preserve traditional arts and methods of cooking and
mm.
things like that. And while, of course, with today's technology and utensils and tools, perhaps you don't need that, but that's not the point.
That's a really interesting point. And I will say what I encountered in Ethiopia, especially with certain traditional artisans, is that there was a stigma attached to certain types of craft production.
Oh,
And yes, for example, the making of certain ceramic vessels, especially coffee, for example. There's a vessel called like a jebana, and it's a traditional coffee making vessel. And these vessels are important, but there's a huge stigma attached to the people who make them because it's considered quote unquote a dirty profession. And this is from
really?
like that kind of quote really stuck with me because it was from a person who did that craft, and she didn't want her children to carry it on because she was like, okay, well, they won't have much social mobility. They won't be able to make as much money. It's kind of looked down upon. I rather them go do something else.
That's fascinating.
There was a really
Yeah.
interesting tension between certain artisans and certain crafts, to the point where certain villages who did these crafts, they were kind of on the outskirts of towns. And even though those traditions and livelihood were important and are important, the people who were doing them, they didn't want their children or their next generation to continue to face that stigma. So that was an interesting tension that I saw play out. It wasn't in my own research, it was in some friends' research.
Right.
But that was quite interesting. Like, what do you do when you have a tradition that is culturally important, but the people who are the specialists in them are not treated well and don't feel like they're treated well? What do you make of that?
That is really food for thought because I think I have focused so much on us making sure that we pay homage to
Mm,
those traditions and those crafts and, the value that they bring to society. Never thinking about the flip side that there are some that they don't want to pass along
mm.
because of reasons like you're talking about. Did you see anything like that in Oman, or is it more of a preservation?
Mm. So in Oman, I will say wasn't as close to certain craft production. I
Right.
was really studying agriculture and how
Ah,
people
okay.
had done agriculture and are doing agriculture, especially with changing
Well,
technologies.
that's fascinating too.
Yeah. So my frame of reference is a little bit different for
Right.
Oman. So there could be similar things happening, and I'm just not as aware of them. We'll say when it comes to farming and
Hmm.
agriculture, a lot of the actual doing of agriculture is being outsourced. So you have people who are migrant workers from different countries coming in to do the large majority of agricultural works. And so it's interesting to see how certain traditions are passed down. For example, dates. Dates are huge in Oman,
Right.
so they're delicious too. So I highly
Yes.
recommend eating a
Okay, good.
variety of
Thank
them when you
you.
go there.
I will definitely make sure I tell all the women that you said so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and there's such a diversity of dates too. And so that knowledge is being preserved, and usually dates need to be hand pollinated. It's a very labor intensive process. So, from what I observed, maybe the supervisory aspect is being handed down from generation to generation, but not
Okay.
so much the execution because you're outsourcing that work. So when I went and did what's called ethnoarchaeology, which is a
Hmm.
simple definition is like ethnography, so
Right.
talking to people and understand what they're doing, but for
Right.
archaeologists.
Right.
So when I was doing that in Oman, and this was back in 2015, 2015, 2016, it was an interesting turning point in terms of, okay, how is this traditional knowledge about the landscape, about date farming or other
Right.
types of farming, how is this being passed down and whom is it being passed down to? And what methods are being preserved and what methods aren't? So that was interesting. And that's something I'm still trying to make sense of as I'm
Yeah.
uh, analyzing the data.
Yeah.
I will say, doing my research as a woman, my research wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Omani women, and they were part of my research team. I did ethnoarchaeology, and I interviewed farmers, but I got to interview a lot of women who were
Oh.
associated with agriculture too, in ways that dominant narratives weren't discussed, and it was due to Omani women and their network, and they would call up their cousin or their friend and say, hey, can Smitty come interview you? I'll be there too, like I'll be translating. And it was this wonderful cultural exchange, but just learning about what interested them as well. So,
Oh,
and
that's
yeah,
fascinating. Yeah.
so I think you're going to have kind of access to women because you're an all women group that
Hmm.
that people might not hear about for various reasons, because
Right.
depending where you are, Omani women, especially where I work, they don't like to be photographed, they don't like videos taken of them, and in this day and age sometimes that means that their stories aren't heard because of those things. So you're going to get incredible access to just experiences and connections that you probably wouldn't have if you were watching a YouTube video.
Right.
So,
Right.
which is amazing.
So now I want to get to what I find really, really interesting is that you also took a different career path.
Mm.
and decided to use the art of storytelling to make what for most people is kind of a boring topic of history and make it come to life. Tell me what made you decide to do that, because I love it. I love that.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I would say before I ever considered myself an archaeologist,
Yeah.
I think the goal was always to be an educator. And so education is something I've just always been drawn to. And so, of course, in the last 20 years, I've debated how to do that. There's the traditional academic path where you would go
Right.
become a professor. And for various reasons, that wasn't a fit. And so a couple years ago, when I was thinking again, oh, what do I want to do in this next stage? I found myself being, really drawn in to archaeology education. And then also during the pandemic, I watched a lot of YouTube.
Yeah. I think we were all kind of forced to do that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And, I had a job at a university where I was an administrator, but I was also doing content creation. And I just found myself really enjoying it. And I was really fascinated by video, but I had never made a video in my
Okay.
life. But there was a part of me that was like, okay, like if you want to do education, you got to kind of meet people where they're at and, interact on platforms that they enjoy. And video just kept,
Screaming your name, right?
yes.
Yeah.
So then I just decided, okay, there must be some editing platform that I can use that's
Right.
not too hard. Or, I could, get help doing that. So yeah, that's kind of what propelled me to do it because I saw this need, I saw this medium that I enjoyed consuming and I wanted to try it out. But in trying it out, I wanted to make sure I was telling stories that, people like me, other women, other people of any historically marginalized group that might not have thought of themselves as a history person would
Right.
find potentially interesting.
My God, when I went on your YouTube and saw all the videos you have, I mean, I started watching. Oh, but wait, then there's that, and then there's that. I want to hear that story, and I want to hear that story. I mean, I kind of need to go back to Dr. Smitty school because they all look fascinating. I mean, you even had one about menstruation,
Hmm.
and I was like, oh my gosh. Now, this is learning I can sign on to
Mm.
because it is fascinating, and you're a great storyteller. I will
Thank you.
give you that. I mean, you're a great storyteller. And where did your love for storytelling come from?
Probably just loving books since
Yeah.
I was a kid,
Yeah.
and really fiction. And to
Ah,
this day, I consume more fiction than nonfiction.
yeah.
But when you hear a good story, whether it's in a podcast, a video, a book, it
Right.
just grips you. And there's so much scientific data about this as well that
Yeah.
we remember better through stories too. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And so you actually make some of the most boring topics in the world that I'm not saying that they're all boring. I'm just, in general, people go, who cares about that? I want to read a book about that. You take them and you make them come alive.
Oh, thank
What are
you.
some of your favorite topics that you've done these videos on?
I love anything to do with plants. I think my whole team, we love plants in general. So you see a lot of plant videos. And
Yeah.
I really just love topics that feel just understudied or underrepresented. So when I say understudied, for example, like menstruation is truly understudied.
Yes.
Even for like in the archaeological record, and that's a definite gap. But there's other topics that aren't necessarily understudied, but don't get the visibility in, mainstream news or public circles as much. So for example, I think cats is a good example. There has been a lot of work done on cats. We were quite overwhelmed with that video. We were like, okay,
Yeah.
like how do we
Yeah.
make this like a cohesive story?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of threads, but maybe it's the algorithm of my feeds. Now I'm seeing more cat stories coming
Right.
up on different channels, but they might not get as much visibility as more sensational topics like
Yeah.
Atlantis or giants building pyramids or other,
Yeah.
kind of conspiracy
Yeah.
theories that I've heard. So those are the topics that we kind of gravitate to. And
Yeah.
especially because I work with a team, when we're tossing around ideas, if everyone's face kind of lights up as a topic is mentioned, then whether it performs well or not, we're excited to do it.
Oh, that's great. So
So-
now you have a team that you're doing this with, that are just
Yeah. And I've been working with a small, nimble team from the get-go. And that's just kind of one, it's hard to do it just all on your own. And I still
Right.
do a bulk of the work. My whole team is part-time or
Yeah.
contract.
Right.
But it's really just nice to get other people's perspective. I
Yeah.
come from a discipline that really you need to be collaborative, and
Right.
your work is better because of it. So I've had a team since, I think, like 4 or 5 months into my channel.
Ah.
Yeah.
So when you choose your stories that you're going to put on there, do you kind of say, okay, I want to talk about this, but I know like the human attention span is limited, so let's get to the meat? Or how do you kind of decide how you're going to do that?
That's a great question. And I will say it's a constant experiment.
Right.
In our early videos, we were trying to build trust with the audience, so we didn't want to waste their time at all.
Right.
So our videos were much shorter. And then we were getting feedback that, hey, we want you to go more in depth on this. Can you explain this a bit more? So then we felt more licensed to create longer videos, go into the nuance. But we're also seeing a need for there to be those shorter videos, but the
Right.
story has to be shorter. So we're playing around with different formats.
Right.
So
Right.
our typical kind of deep dives will probably keep it to like 15 to 25 minutes, but
Right.
we're going to start rolling out some new content, hopefully this fall, that are a bit shorter, but don't take away from the depth of the story.
Do most of your videos take place in destination, or you use a lot of graphic arts and photos and things like that?
We use a lot of photos and videos.
right.
And in video production, there's this thing called B-roll, which is,
Yes.
yes.
Oh my
So it's-
gosh, I hear B-roll all
Yes.
day long. Yeah.
Yeah. So those
Yeah.
are, media that are layered onto
Right.
a video. And that is a huge part of our process, finding accurate B-roll to give people the proper visualization of what's
Right.
going on. And that honestly takes the most amount
Yeah.
of time and preparation, second to actually writing the script. We don't do as much on site, but we'd love to. And that really comes down to funding and honestly bandwidth too, to get out to these sites. So I'd love to do something on site in the future, and we're hopefully going to write some grants, and maybe they'll be successful in the future years.
Do you see yourself doing a documentary of any kind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the videos that we've been doing already are somewhat mini documentaries
Yes.
that are a bit more of like, a mini documentary lit review. It's not everything that's happening, but it's
yeah.
like samples. So I think it's preparing us to probably do something more of an in-depth documentary style video in the
Right.
future that's a bit more on site. But again, that's all dependent on funding.
Of
So,
course. It's
yeah.
always about the
Yes.
money,
I
right?
know.
I know, that nasty, dirty word.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this. Is historically and now, is archaeology more of a male-dominated field?
This is such a good question. There's a lot of nuance to this. So, from the latest numbers that I've seen, which are a couple of years old, but there was, I think, a survey about the field in general. There are technically more women in the field. However, the caveat there is there's less women in higher ranking positions.
Ah.
So,
Also predictable.
yes. So, yes, we're seeing probably more women than we ever have, if I'm getting my numbers right, in the field. But there's still a major disparity on who's getting those kind of top ranking positions. And in all honesty, like, women have been part of the field since the beginning, however you count the beginning.
Right. The beginning of
so-
time.
yeah. So, and also the beginning of archaeology. So,
Right.
but their, contributions might not have always been recognized or credited. So we hear, and I still hear stories all the time of like, oh, so and so is an expert in this. And then we learn later that, like, oh, his wife really helped him with his like
Yeah.
dissertation
Yes,
and then
yes,
did
yes.
all this work. And it's like, oh, okay. And so
Yeah.
there's stories like that we hear. And, there's a lot of amazing public archaeologists and archaeologists who are doing work to surface those women's stories.
Oh,
There's
that's wonderful.
yeah, there's this one particular group. They're not as active as they used to be, but they have a great legacy online and publications called Trailblazers. And they specifically highlight women who have not been highlighted in the
Right.
archaeological record or their contributions to the field. So there is a bit more surfacing of that.
Yeah, I'm like you. I have read, and not just in, your fields, but in numerous fields, even writers who have
Mm-hmm.
taken credit for manuscripts that were written by their
Yeah.
wives or muse or whatever you want to call them. And it's a little bit horrifying, like to think about. I mean, listen, I've worked all my life and I've always been paid less than my male
Mm-hmm.
counterparts, even though I worked so much harder
Mm,
and maybe, and at least in my mind, made far more contributions. And no matter how much I'd like to think it has improved, I will say that in certain ways it has. But women are still earning so much less than men. They are still having to claw their way to achieve, break those ceilings. I don't know why we have to break ceilings.
yeah.
Why shouldn't it just be a thing?
Right. I will say, I think what gives me hope is that in doing this non-traditional path, I can be really selective about who I work with and who I
Ah,
feel safe with. And,
I love that.
oftentimes when you're coming up in the field, there's brilliant people who have left the field because they've been in really crappy circumstances and they've had no accountability or no one who's got their back. And I feel very privileged and fortunate that I'm in a position now where, if someone's being a jerk, I don't have to work
You
with
don't have
them.
to work with
No.
them.
And that's a type of freedom that I really
Oh my gosh,
appreciate.
that is like utopia, really, for
Yes,
a woman. Like, sorry,
absolutely.
don't need you. I'm over it.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
look, there are, of course, challenging collaborations, and,
Yeah.
you know, you have to meet people kind of where they are. But, if your kind of jerk radar is going off, like you can listen to it. And
Yeah.
that's really great. So, the people who I bring onto my channel, the people who I choose to collaborate with academically, it is truly my choice. And I'm so grateful. And so I'm not saying it doesn't happen in the field. It
Right.
absolutely does. But
Right.
one of my kind of requirements for myself in staying engaged in this field was that, I want to work with people whose values align with mine as well as their
Yes.
behaviors. So I feel very privileged to be able to make that choice. And then, when you work with good people, they work with good people too. And it creates a better environment overall. So I'm grateful that I'm in the position that I am now. But I definitely have those
Yeah.
personality fieldwork
Yeah.
horror stories. And,
Yeah.
I hope they become less and less.
I
But,
do too.
that's a bit of the reality.
Kudos to you, though, for taking control of your own destiny and giving yourself the option to have those choices, because so many of us have not. And
Mm,
generationally, we have grown up with different, I'll call them directives or mandates on how
yeah.
we're supposed to be and live and all these things. So I know we're almost out of time here, but do you have a favorite story of your time as an archaeologist?
I will say some of my favorite parts of archaeology in general are those relationships. It's the relationships with locals, it's the relationships with your
Yeah.
team. It's even the relationship with those closest to you that is
Yeah.
helping make your kind of archaeological dreams come true, as
Right.
cheesy as that might sound. So when I think of field moments, like if I'm thinking it when I'm in the field and the things that really stick out to me. Yeah, of course it's doing it, you can find things and that's really cool. But like I mentioned, that discovery process is a long process.
Right.
But it's joking around in the field. It's
Yeah.
playing pranks on each other.
Yeah, that's the
It's
fun part,
yeah,
right?
it's
Yeah.
having meals together. It's getting lost and trying to figure your way, back to your dig house when the
Right.
GPS isn't working. It's getting flooded, like because there's a rainstorm that just happens to come across, and some
Yeah.
nice, generous person just lets you in their house. And
Aw.
so
Yeah.
it's those
Those are the
moments.
moments. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of times they're planned things, and sometimes it's just going with the moment and
Yeah.
figuring it out as you go. So those are the big ones that come to mind. So it's hard to pinpoint one story, but I will
Right.
say it's just those moments doing the science and adjacent to doing the science that make fieldwork very special.
Yeah. Gosh, thank you so much for sharing this with me because, first of all, I needed this uplifting conversation today, and I am fascinated by what you do. And we're going to make sure that we send all of our audience to watch your videos because I think they're great. And I have a lot more that I'd like to watch.
Oh,
So,
well, thank you so much. And
yeah, the
thanks for
topic.
reaching out and having me on. And you're a brilliant interviewer, Stacey. I have a lot to learn, so I'll be studying your videos as well.
Well,
So,
thank you. That
no,
is very kind of you.
absolutely. Like you just got on and it felt like, oh, I know this person. And it was
Yeah,
it
I
was
don't like to use notes or anything like that because I feel like I don't want this to be rehearsed. I want this to
mm,
be a real conversation. Like, you're a lovely woman. I'd like to get to know you. And so,
well, you're definitely a guiding light for me on how to do a podcast. So thank you.
that's an honor for you to say that.
Oh my
Thank you
gosh.
so, so much. If you liked this show, please be sure to like us, follow us, subscribe to us, give us a review, because it really helps grow our podcast.